Alright, today we want to look at how to graph a square root function. And we've broken that down into 5 basic steps. Our steps are to first find the domain and the range of the function. Now that's something that we talked about in our last videos. From the domain and the range of the function, we want to identify the direction the graph will go. Okay, if you think about the domain and the range, it talked about x being greater than, so we know where it will start with the domain. Is it going to go greater or is it going to go less if x was less than? Okay, same with the y values. Okay, now we're going to use that those points, the x and the y value, to create a point, and that will tell us where our graph is going to start. Okay, it will start at that point, so we're going to graph our starting point. And then from there we're going to find and plot 2 more points. Now, sometimes this can be the trickiest part, finding and plotting 2 more points. A couple of suggestions. Number 1, let's remember that we already know the domain, so that will tell us which direction our x value should be going. We also want to think about what kinds of things will come out of the square root, or in other words, what kinds of x values do we want to put in order to get good outputs out of the square root portion of our function. Once we have those 2 points and we have plotted them, we are going to continue to draw the rest of our graph. Okay, we're going to draw the rest of our graph. Most square root graphs look somewhat similar, so we're going to start by taking a look at a very simple square root function. Our first square root function is the function f of x equals the square root of x. In order to graph this function, we first want to find the domain and the range. Well, the domain is that x must be greater than or equal to 0. If we think of this function as being the same as f of x equals the square root of x plus 0 plus a 0, we start to get those same points that we had with our domain and range lesson the other day. We also find out that y has to be greater than or equal to 0. And from that part we're going to make a little x, y chart, and our first point is going to be the point 0, 0. We're going to graph that point right there on our xy plane. And from there we're going to put in some more x values. Now, I like to put in x values that I know will work good. I know 1, in this case, will work good because I'm going to be taking the square root of 1. And the square root of 1 is just 1, and that's how we're going to get the point 1, 1. From there, I'm going to put in the point 4. Now, once again, this comes into one of those experience kind of situations. The more you do this, the more you recognize it. If we put something in that will give us a perfect square, we will get out a nice number to work with. And we end up with the point 4, 2. We'll graph that point. Now we have enough points to plot the rest of our graph, and we're going to draw in our graph as best we can. And it continues off here, in this case, to the right, but it stops at that starting point, or it starts at that starting point, does not go beyond in that direction. Okay, this is our basic f of x equals the square root of x graph. Let's take a look at another. Our next graph that we would like to look at is the graph of the square root of x plus 2 minus a 4. And we're going to start by looking at our domain again. Our domain will be that x plus 2 is going to have to be greater than or equal to 0, or rather that x is going to have to be greater than or equal to negative 2. There's our domain. From there we're going to go look for our range. And our range, if you recall, is based on that number that is outside of the square root that's being added or subtracted. and in this case y is going to be greater than or equal to -4. So that is our range. Alright, those two put together are going to give us our starting point, -2, -4, which would be right down here. From there, we're going to put in new numbers. Alright, x is going to be greater than or equal to -2, so we got to count up from -2, so -1, 0, 1, 2, etc. All those are fair numbers. I'm going to put in an f of -1, in other words, a -1 for an x value. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm looking at this going, if I take -1 and I add 2 to that, I get a square root of a +1. Not worried about the 4 at this point in time. I know that the square root of a +1 is a regular old 1, and that's how I get a nice clean number, if you will, out of my square root function. And I get the point -1, -3. So we have the point -2, -4, and -1, -3. Okay, we need one more point. So let's put in an f of 2. Once again, the more you do these, the more you will see why you want to use this particular number in this particular case. But I'm looking ahead at x plus 2, realizing that if I put in a 2, I will get a square root of 4, and a square root of 4 is a nice clean square root. Alright, so we get a 2 minus a 4, which becomes a -2. So if we put in a 2 for x, we get out a -2 for y. That gives us this point right here, -2, 2, -2. And now we're ready to draw our graph. Our graph is going to start back here at this point, and it's going to keep going off in this direction like that. And that's how we graph a square root function.